there was an old song by Buffalo Springfield called For What It's Worth. And it starts out and it says, something's happening here and what it is ain't exactly clear. And that's kind of the way it feels unprecedented in some ways. There are a number of elements to it that are different this go round, and the mood and the anger, and it's just different than the 60s. And we can unpack, I think, what ways it is different, but you can definitely palpably feel the difference in my estimation.
I'm thinking about a couple of things, right? One, I think that there is a confluence here that is similar to other instances, right? But the confluences are a little different this time around, right? First off, right, this moment is happening in the midst of a global pandemic, right? And so that global pandemic has helped to supercharge these dynamics, right? You know, what does this moment look like if there is no global pandemic and the 3+ million people who are not working now are still gainfully employed, right? You know, this could look like I think this would still be a really large moment, but it might not be as large. I don't know, right? This is just sort of speculation on my part, but the confluence here, right? The confluence of Black Lives Matter and police brutality, very high levels of anxiety that people are feeling, not just Black folk, the ways in which we have the federal government and the president of the United States is in my estimation doing the exact opposite of what a president should be doing right now. You know, Trump likes to sow the seeds of division, right? He likes to pour gasoline on flames, right? There's a very large confluence here. We have to be mindful of that. The anger that was being expressed and articulated in 1968, it makes sense to us now in 2020, right? But in 1968, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to a whole lot of people, right? And this is one of those instances where we tend not to take King seriously. When King said a riot is the language of the unheard, right? And he also said, look, you know what? I'm not going to condemn the act of riot without also condemning the conditions which lead to the act itself, right? Then all of a sudden, a lot of King's allies started to fall away because, you know, he said, look, you know what? These things don't happen in a vacuum. It's not like everything was going along really, really peachy and fine. And then Black folks inexplicably took to the streets in Watts and Newark and all across the country in the late 1960s in open rebellion, right? That's willful ignorance if we think that's the case. And I think that same dynamic applies to right now. It's willful ignorance if you're still running around asking yourself, why are people out in the streets and why are people so angry? And I think that's the other thing that's supercharging this moment are the circumstances around these instances of police murder, right? These aren't police brutality, this is police murder. It is unambiguous to see what happened to George Floyd, right? There was no chase. He did not have a gun. He had been arrested. He had been subdued. He was laying on his stomach, handcuffed. And we saw somebody place their knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 47 seconds until he died, right? Ahmaud Arbery was jogging, minding his own business, and was chased, hunted, and murdered. And then on top of having been chased, hunted, and murdered, it took 3 district attorneys, 3, 1, 2, 3, before we finally got to a district attorney that said, yes, maybe we should actually arrest the people who murdered Ahmaud Arbery in the street. So what we are witnessing here is naked racist aggression. And so I think that has also helped to supercharge this moment.
Let me pick up on one point you made there, Chuck, because I think it's a really good one as well. And that is, there is, I think, an economic component to this. There's clearly racial, there's clearly health-related anxiety. People are at home more than they were and so on. We get that. But I think it's also easy to overlook the economic trends that have been with us, say, since the 1980s, in which more and more people are economically insecure. I mean, we're looking at a population now that some estimate up to 80% of the population can't absorb the unexpected bill of $500 or $1,000, right? They're living basically paycheck to paycheck. That is a combustible situation. Because even though the stock market was soaring, unemployment was 3.5%, it hid the fact that a large share of the American population was one paycheck away from real serious economic problems. And that has been, of course, exacerbated by the lockdowns and so on now. The movements were already afoot, right? Occupy Wall Street, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, even Donald Trump to some extent, represent a lot of economic insecurity and frustration as well. So this didn't start with George Floyd. This was accelerated by blatant racist behavior, but the underlying problems were there, and now we see them just exploding in the streets.